My name is Julie Kim, and I am the chair of the School of Architecture. I've had the great pleasure of working with Michael Murphy over the last 4 years, more closely over the last year, putting this whole production together. It's more than an event, it feels like a production. I'm an architect, and I'm an educator, and my own work really looks at trying to connect design, technology, and community-centered practice. I'm really pleased to be joined on the stage with my colleagues, and I'm going to ask each one of them to introduce themselves, and then we'll start right in. Marlon.
Yes, Marlon Blackwell. I'm an educator as well, but my focus primarily has been practice. I have a firm of about 20 folks based in Fayetteville, Arkansas, doing work out in the hinterlands, the nether regions, as well as all over the country and even internationally, and just working from the simple premise that architecture can happen anywhere, at any scale, at any budget, and for anyone. It's not just reserved for the privileged few, but it's for everybody. So that's kind of the ethos we've been working with.
Peace, my name is Brandon B. Mike Odoms. I am a visual artist from the greatest city on the planet, New Orleans.
Yeah, and thanks for having me. Excited to be here. Jonathan Tate, also an architect, small practice, and also based in New Orleans, greatest city on the planet. I'll take your lead there. Yeah, well, we're going to play the disagreement thing.
I'm not going to debate.
Yeah.
I love Fayetteville, but
not the second
great.
best city.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, but also educator as well. I'm a professor at Tulane University too. So.
Thanks so much. So we had a call last week as we were starting to get prepared for this conversation today, and it was a really rich and dynamic discussion, and it made me even more excited to think about how our conversation today is going to talk about the role that architecture and art can play in mediating spatial and social change. But specifically how we might think about situating design as an embedded process. It's contextual and it's iterative, and how do we learn from the environments in which we are working by really thinking about the cultural dimensions, the historical dimensions, environmental dimensions, but thinking about them across scales. And our session is really looking at this idea of building at the fringe. And so that was an interesting kind of moment for us as we talked about. And when I looked at the three of your work, I would say that each of you demonstrate really effectively how design interventions can emerge from a very close and careful reading of place. And then it evolves into a whole range of strategies that operate across both spatial scales, but also temporal scales. And that was really interesting as I started really diving into your work. I think that your work also operates as both interpretive, but also as political acts in a way, which I find to be a really interesting kind of tension there. But what they do is that they reveal these kind of underlying narratives and really thinking about the power dynamics that might be embedded in place, right? So when you look at a context, like really understanding the rich and deeply layered conditions that are there. So I think what's interesting is when I think about all of your work is that your projects, they demonstrate in a really poetic and an intentional way how to collaboratively uncover local knowledge, right? And those lived experiences that can inform more equitable or more sensitive types of interventions. So I think in the end, fundamentally, what I'm hoping our conversation will reveal is that how this approach can promote more inclusive frameworks for the creative inquiries across scales, right? And so at our conversation, we started talking about what does it mean to be at the fringe. And I think it was Michael Murphy who said, you know, the fringe is the space of innovation. I thought, wow, that's so great, I'm stealing that. And what I loved about it is that it really talked about this idea about being at the edge, right? It can be both unsettling, but it's also really exciting. So that leads me to my first question. And the way we're going to do this is going to be a fairly organic kind of conversation that I'm hoping that the three of you will just jump in, and then maybe you'll even ask questions of each other as well. But let's start here. So what constitutes, in your minds, an ethical and contextually appropriate design response at the fringe, but especially where investment is uneven, where those histories are layered, and within communities that are often marginalized.
Who's going to take that one first? So well, I mean, I guess I'll start this off in more general terms, I should say, in context of the question. I would say that I'm going to both repeat what you've said already about how you work in these places. I think fundamentally in these places, I think also deserve a little discussion, like what do we mean by Fringe exactly, and where we're working, and those kinds of things. But what I would say is that the relevance of being incremental is critical. Like this is not something that you do and you walk away from. It takes time. It happens over time. I think the role of partnership is also fundamental and critical in this situation. And being strategic, having plans, and knowing where a project might go, but allowing it to kind of lead itself to some extent. And then finally, I'd say it's like this full commitment to like this takes time. It's an evolution. It's something you work on, and there's an investment in that you don't. I think the successful ones you don't walk away from, right? Like there are things that evolve and you see happen over years and years and years. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for us, it's, the fringes often are those places where you'd least expect to find architecture or what you understand to be design. And, it's something, it's an opportunity to provide, the gift of connections here for folks. And, so often, design is used in such a way that it pushes people away, right? It seems exclusive. And we're constantly trying to look for interscalar opportunities to open that up, whether it's the scale of the city or the town or the scale of a building or the scale of the hand, a simple detail, being able to sit in a window, something like that, where people have the opportunity to stay and linger rather than being hurried through. There's some designs that want to get people to move and just move on out and get them on out, rather than introducing spaces, primarily public, right, that are welcoming, that are generous, whether it's in the form of a porch, right, or a form of a public gathering space, whatever, to allow life to happen. And then to question what is public space and how that can be used to shape. I mean, basically, for us, place is the canvas and architecture is the medium. And then public life and nature are what helps shape, and the specificities place is what helps shape that canvas. So I think that's really a kind of our ethos, and then that allows us to engage that process. Once you have that sort of spirit of generosity and collaboration, then you can have a conversation, I think. But you have to have a kind of mindset where 1 + 1 can never equal 2, right? It's using an economy of means for a maximum of meaning. So there's a kind of resourcefulness too that people, I think, want to see, that I can solve 5 things with 1 thing, and that's, I think, also quite a gift you can give too.
I think building on the Fringe for me is, I don't know, I think it's speaking about like what Robin Kelly said about building on the ashes of a nightmare. It's like the Fringe wasn't something that I sought out, it was next to me. It was like the thing that was left behind. Like I come to this work by way of, I guess, a practice that was responding to Hurricane Katrina damaged spaces that were a reminder of neglect, a reminder of displacement. And it was a choice of, do you wait for someone else to come in and reimagine a said thing, or do you try to do the best you can with what you got to sort of create within that space? And so the Fringe was never something that was sought out. It was sort of like the alchemy of seeing what was in front of you and saying, this could be something else. And then as a result, you sort of like learn, at least for me speaking personally, is learning how that practice is repeated, what the pros and cons of that, like how it can be extractive. The Fringe gets pulled to the center and it's safe, and then people seek a new fringe or a new edge. So those are all the things that I was questioning as I began to like approach some of the work that I do.
That's a great segue into my next question, which is, when I looked at each of your works, you were operating in very different types of conditions. Marlon, I think that, when we had our conversation, you talked about, for you, like you're grappling with the horizon, right? And that's very different than someone who might be embedded in a more dense kind of urban setting, right? So, but I think that all of you, your projects have catalyzed in many ways a change in place. And Brandon, this kind of builds a little bit on what you were just speaking about. And I think that, so I have a couple of questions. One is that, what are your thoughts about the nuanced difference between maybe what we might call place making versus place keeping, right? I think that those are slightly different. And then where have you seen a place change because of the things that you have done? And have they always changed in a way that you've perceived as being positive, right? As being productive and moving forward? So a couple of questions kind of buried in that.
Well, I could start with the context of place making versus place keeping. Yeah. Coming from a city like New Orleans, which is one of the oldest cities in this country, we're 300, something. And there's this constant conflict of preservation versus progress. And so there is this idea about what do we preserve, and then at the expense of preserving, what are we not progressing towards? And so I know from personal experiences, post-Hurricane Katrina, there was a lot of conversations that felt like it was placemaking. It was about others from afar coming down and saying, hey, this is what should happen, or these are the bright ideas that are happening elsewhere. And then there was a big push or a call to reflect on what does it mean to preserve, what does it mean to think about a space, and how what it already is worth maintaining or worth honoring. And that's the way I sort of think about those two questions. As a muralist, when I go into spaces and people ask me to paint a mural, I'm often questioning what's going to happen as a result of this new, fresh painting. Like, is it going to change the space, or does it amplify what's already there? And so that's kind of how I'm constantly dancing with those two ideas. So I started it.
Well, yeah, and to build on that for just a second, I think it's interesting to look back at the Katrina context. And I moved to New Orleans with Katrina to be involved in all the work that was happening there as well. So I have kind of that as a framework. And in many ways, that experience is what built a practice for me and the people that we were working with and the kinds of things that we were doing. And I would say, the intimate relationships that we had with the people that had vision, that needed help creating that vision in some way or another, whether it's through a graphic or through representation, and to try to make that materialize. But I guess the point, or what I wanted to add to, was the idea of preservation of place doesn't mean that it's preserved, right? In other words, it's not what I would say, it's not pickled, right? We're not trying to put this thing in and keep it what it is forever and ever. And I think that's the richness in your work and the things that we try to do, Marlon, as well. It's how does a place kind of transcend that and grow, but at the same time kind of respect what it is and where it came from. And that, it's front and center, I think, every day in New Orleans, given its history, but I think that's true in any place, you work. So, but I think that dialogue between making something new in a place that's old and appreciated for that reason is a rich conversation, right? And
yeah, and I think it's being attentive to place, wherever you're at. Every place is a place, and in that place there are good things and there are tortured histories and bad things, and what we try to do is look at everything and find a way to bring it into the process, bring it into the way we think about it, so it isn't, we're trying to exclude anything, right? And by incorporating that, it kind of helps us understand better what is this place, and what do we bring forward as part of the story that we want to tell. And things are nuanced, and they're not everything's equal, in a place. And I think for us, where I'm at, we have a history, but so much of it's been erased over time. There's just not there. I don't even call what we're in is urban. It's just all at the urban scale. We're in what I call ruburban, or in urban pastoral. What was agriculture and then becomes part of a town, and then some attempt at being civic, and so we're trying to actually part of the progression perhaps to that next state, rather than trying to take it back to something, but trying to kind of uncover the repressed raw power of the place that's never really been opened up, because they've never really had public space. Yeah. And for us, that's where it really starts, is finding ways in whatever project, whether it's institutional, whether it's private, a school, whatever, finding ways to allow the public and the users, the stakeholders in there to come together. So there's always a sense of community, right, in the place, a kind of fundamental civic dignity where everybody feels like they're part owner of this or part, citizen or part, of all of this community member. And I think that's the key to it, so nobody feels like they're shut out.
Yeah. I think maybe even building on that, I mean, the theme of the session is, this rehabilitation, is about this idea of healing.
And that's a lot of what we're trying to do.
And that's what you're doing. So
Yeah.
I think, all of you are thinking about the healing in various forms, like healing at the scale of the landscape, of the community, of our bodies. And I wondered, maybe if we can just kind of continue this line of conversation a little bit more, but just to talk more specifically about the role that art and architecture can play as it seeks some sort of like resolution, or like what is a desired outcome? Like what's the impact? Like how do you measure it?
Yeah, now the thing to do is turn everything qualitative into quantitative data, and so that you can work it in reverse, so you can make an argument for some kind of design thing. For us, it happens at a much more at a street level. We took a library, which was an old hardware store, and turned it into a public library for this small town, right? It's still the least expensive public library in the state of Arkansas. And the measure of success, even though it won all these awards and publications, in a town of 2,500 when we started, 7 years before, they had 300 library card holders. When we finished, we had 2,300 library card holders. People would actually show up in their cars and park outside the library just to get Wi-Fi so that they could, be a part. So it became this kind of civic center on the main street, not out on the edge of town, made out of old bricks, from that hardware store. That to me was a measure of success because it became a kind of seed for the development of the rest of this small town, right? So those are things that I can't necessarily just put purely into data, but it shows an impact. And what's the other impact is to come back 20 years later and they're taking care of it. They love it. And that's what I always try to communicate to folks, is that if folks don't love it, it doesn't matter what environmental or social kind of agenda there is with it. If people don't love the outcome, over time they will tear it down or abuse it. And in a lot of ways, buildings are abused and places are abused over time by the community.
This is obviously coming from an architect, but like if you think, or rather I tend to think that all of a community's aspirations, desires, politics, everything else is manifest in the built environment in some way, right? Like you can read it, or you should be able to read it, I think, or it's legible, let's say, through the built environment. And it puts, I think, an enormity of responsibility on us who are making things in that environment to do things that are sensitive to that help a place grow, and that speak to as best as one can through a built project and its limited nature that it is, to address and respond to those conditions and envision a future for a place. And so I think in broader terms, like I see that is the role of architects and architecture in rehabilitation or in what we do. And it's true for public art, right? Like it's how, again, there's nothing like seeing something that's tangible that just says to people like there's effort here, there's things going on. And in some of the communities that we work in, not in New Orleans, but in others like small towns and so forth, there's something very important and critical about seeing progress and seeing something like that's turned and that sees use in a new life. And yeah, I just see that sort of as fundamental in like how the regenerative or rehabilitation happens at this.
Yeah, I think in terms of the call and response, I think I would probably put it in that term as like a very, I don't know, everything I say is going to root back to what I've learned from New Orleans. So is New Orleans as a very African city, a part of that history is about call and response. It's about this back and forth. And I think for me as an artist, my practice, I was introduced to space via my desire to paint on space. And it was just initially just this opportunity or understanding of what was left behind, and that grew over the scale of a few projects, and now we have our own space, and now it's about learning or capsulizing all those lessons we've learned from these previous projects into what this space can continue to do for the community. And what we've learned is that it's about being a living space. It's about being a space where it's the difference between a practice and the cathedral. It's like the idea that as a practice, this is a thing that's never complete, and I feel way more comfortable speaking about this as a design project when I think about it as an art practice, when I think about it as me in the studio getting messy, covering up mistakes, or realizing in real time that something is not working, or someone coming in and saying, hey, this would work better, and making that be the project. And I think what we're blessed with this space, Studio B in New Orleans, is that we have a space that is unassuming, and it's also something that people feel like they're not intimidated by the idea that they can be included. It's not something that just popped up overnight. People saw the transition from it growing from the concrete to where it is now. And I think that them being welcomed for the entire journey made it so that it's a space that people feel like it's theirs as well. And it's not just a monument to a thing, it's a living space that's changing and God willing continues to change. And I think there's a healing part of that. I mean, art obviously is aesthetically healing. It speaks even when your voice shakes. But I think that there is a part of what I'm learning about this space that is about how we are allowing radical imagination, kind of what was said earlier, what was said earlier by the former mayor, like the way to predict the future is to imagine it. And I think in real time, we're seeing that practice happen with this space. So that's extremely healing.
Yeah, I think that, one of the things that comes through as we're having this conversation is about the kind of sense of the being generous, the kind of generosity, right, of, giving back to a place, while we're learning from something, but not extracting it in a way like to advance our own personal agendas, but it is a kind of a generous act of reconciliation, of rehabilitation. I find that to be so rich. And Michael Murphy, when he was introducing this event, he shared something that I think that you had, I think it was yours, we are our ancestors' wildest dreams, which then also falls on this whole idea of like, if you want to, imagine the future, build the future, you have to imagine what that future might be. So that maybe like raises a next question, for me, for the three of you, is when you think about that, this idea of, understanding where we are today, that we're here because of a whole bunch of things that happened before. And then as we start to think forward, like where might we go next? What are some of if you think about the kind of implications of scale, right? How might those impact the way that we think about shaping design strategies that will be both responsive and enduring, maybe even anticipatory in some ways? So I'd love to hear you talk about that a little bit, like, both from the spatial aspects and the temporal aspects, just in your own work and the way that you think about what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, I talked a little bit about scale, but for us, almost every project we do comes with a porch in some ways, like a kind of liminal zone in which you don't have to go in, but it says welcome into this space, right? And we never treat it as an additive thing. We carve it because it's part of the art. It's integral, right? And it doesn't matter what the project is. It comes with that in some ways. And so that's kind of our gesture back at that scale, the human scale, to, again, act as a handshake, let's say, for the project to whoever comes. And I think that's proven to be pretty effective in the buildings. I think the other thing is to look at material culture. I liked what Michael said the other day, I think maybe last night, about how they build in a place particularly, and find the material culture of a place and to amplify that, to celebrate it. And I think, and allow that to manifest itself in the architecture. So to defer about the pristine kind of, I need the white box, or I need this kind of abstraction, and find something local in what you do to situate the universal in what we know in our own discipline, our own language. And so it's this tension, I think, between what we understand as local and maybe even from the vernacular to the larger global, kind of a global approach. But there's a tension there, and it's I would say it's strangely familiar, we like to say. And that, I think, also welcomes people in, but also keeps them engaged in what you're doing. It's not something they've seen it before, but they haven't.
What I've learned in reference to scale is a real-time conversation I'm having all the time. So I'm gonna give you an example. I just completed, not just, a couple years ago, completed the mural that was like 110 feet tall by like 160 feet wide. It is big. And it was grueling. It was a beautiful process. I enjoyed it so much, but it was 4 weeks of my time. Normally I'm trying to get done in a week, and it was 4 weeks. I'm taking ice baths after. It's like so much going into it.
That's the part of New Orleans probably tougher, right? Yeah, a little hot. Yeah.
But what I learned is that what the audience, the 100-foot mural and the 20-foot mural, the audience is going to do the same thing. They're going to give it about 8 seconds of their time. It's like the Billboard rule. They're going to give 8 seconds, look at it, okay, and keep moving. And so I had to think about scale in a different way, because in my initial thoughts, it's like, oh, the bigger, the more impact, the better. And I was like, wait, why am I working so hard for this 100-something foot mural when I could achieve the same thing with a 20-foot, 30-foot mural? The way we think about scale in Studio B is, I'm glad that photo was on the wall. We think about it through the people that we can impact. If I distill that lessons of 8 seconds and say, okay, instead of me thinking about how many people I can have 8-second experience with, let me just focus on that 8 seconds with that person and think about how deep it can go and how meaningful it can be. So for us, contrary to sometimes even the advice of how things should scale, it's about how we can grow with the folks who are a part and who find their way through the door. How we can, last night I had dinner with some of the young folks that we've been mentoring, and they're in school out here now. And for me, it's like this idea that I can say I worked with a youth when they were 15 and now they're 20-something, and there is no exit plan. Like, the scale is that they're gonna grow as we grow. And it's not about making hundreds and hundreds more of those people. It's about saying, how can we go as intentional, as deep with the ones who have found their way to us? And that's the way I'm thinking about scale currently. I mean, it might change tomorrow, but it doesn't make sense for me, especially in the context of our audience and art, and we probably can think about it that way and a little more clear. It's like, it really isn't, at least I've been convinced, to have hundreds of thousands of people know a thing and not have a personal relationship. It's impossible to have a personal relationship with those hundreds of thousands of people, as opposed to going deep with a few, and that's the way I think about scale.
I love that. I think that brings me to maybe our final question as we've been having this conversation. But clearly, we've been talking a lot about kind of like a collaborative process. I mean, what we do is inherently collaborative, right? It's not a solo act. And so we talk about collaboration with artists, with architects, and the landscapes, right? We all advocate for it. Can each one of you just say, what are we unable to achieve without it, without this kind of collaboration? Jonathan, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, well, what are we unable to achieve without it? Oh, wow. Answering that in the negative. If I can, like, maybe answer it in the positive, it's like the way I might frame it is that everything we do naturally is in the collaborative, and I guess I would have to imagine all the things that we haven't been able to do to maybe give the right response to that. But I will say that, like, those collaborations are the kind of richest aspect of any project, and I often see, like, our role as the architect is like, how can we bring someone's vision to life? I mean, that is our role as an architect, but they, and a lot of that is listening, a lot of that is participation, a lot of that is understanding and being empathetic with what someone is trying to do, and I quite frankly, I feel like that's what is, has been the most enriching parts of our practice, is that relationship with people that we've been able to, like Brandon and others that have been able to spend time with and over years and help kind of develop something out of that, and so I don't know what we, and I don't want to say this in absolutes either, it's like what we can't create, I don't want to say we can't create meaningful, buildings as a result, like that's not necessarily true, but I think we do, especially when it comes to projects that are meant to engage people, bring people into a process, bring people into an organization, it's like I feel like you lose that opportunity to make the connection, and architecture forms that bridge, right? So perhaps we lose that if we're not able to do it. So
Yeah, I don't think we can tell the story of a place. I think the story would always be probably woefully incomplete and overly formal. Yeah. And I think there's a situation of, what is it to be a human being? And you have to be around human beings and working with human beings to actually have architecture that has a certain kind of humanity to it, right? So it isn't just merely objectified. And that's what keeps me away from just, being a sculptor or, just making architectural objects, right? Is you're trying to think of it that who it's for, and it's a framework for life to happen. Aurelius Blomstedt, who's a Finnish architect, had this great quote that architecture has no absolute value in itself. It is only the making of a stream bed. The stream is the main thing. And that's, to me, what collaboration allows us to do, is to get to the stream. We make the stream bed, but in the end, it allows for the stream to flow, allows for life to happen.
Yeah, if I got one thing, I feel like we're all agreeing and we're preaching to the choir, but I think that one thing recently, just recent stories, so there's a new mayor in New Orleans, and I've been part of her arts and culture transition team, and there was this conversation about what it means to include artists in the room. And at first it was framed from this almost like a charity thing, like, we should do this because it looks
check
good.
that box.
Yeah,
Check the box.
But then it's like reframing it to say, it's not just that. I mean, that's great, but how much more would you gain from having those voices present? So it's not just collaboration as a thing that feels good and you did the right thing, but it's so much better as a result of, so much better as a result of including voices. Like, you're better. Like, the choir is, in my opinion, much better than the soloists.
And I think you can be bolder.
Yeah, exactly.
I think if you listen carefully and deeply, it allows you to be bolder in terms of the response. It's a call and response type thing.
Yeah, call and response.
Yeah.
This has been such a fantastic conversation. It lived up to the promise of our call last week. I've learned so much more about each one of you and the work that you bring forward. It's inspiring to me. I hope it's inspiring to all of you. I want to thank our panelists for joining us on the stage today, and thank you, all of you.